Hey, good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Gadi Schwartz coming to you from Los Angeles. And here's some of the stories we're watching tonight, starting with that debt ceiling crisis averted presidential address tonight from the Oval Office.
No one got everything they wanted, but the American people got what they needed.
The president is getting ready to sign the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which pushes the debt ceiling back for 2 more years and cuts spending. We're going to bring you the latest from Washington. And the death of former Wild 'N Out star Jacky Oh is raising questions. How the 32-year-old reportedly underwent a mommy makeover surgery before her untimely death. Plus, dueling protests over pride. Students at an elementary school in California are taught that some kids have 2 mommies, some kids have 2 daddies, and that has sparked a very heated protest.
LAUSD needs to stop grooming our kids.
I think it's great, especially for my daughter, to see representation of our family.
And tonight, the debt ceiling saga might be almost officially behind us. The Senate passed the Fiscal Responsibility Act late last night. That bill is just about ready to get to the president's desk to make it into law after his signature. And once signed, it officially raises the debt ceiling for the next 2 years. It also has a cut to non-military spending, an increase in defense spending, all while restarting student loan payments in the next near term, which has been on pause for 3 years now. Now, President Biden did address the nation earlier this evening, calling the passing of the bill critical.
This budget agreement was critical. The stakes could not have been higher. If we had failed to reach an agreement on the budget, there were extreme voices threatening to take America, for the first time in our 247-year history, into default on our national debt. No one got everything they wanted, but the American people got what they needed. We averted an economic crisis, an economic collapse.
NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins us now. Monica, so now that this looks like a done deal, we saw the markets close very strong today in the U.S. and abroad, but Fitch still came out today saying that they're going to keep the U.S. on a negative watch through the third quarter of the year. Was the White House expecting that?
Look, this was a really big question, Gadi, heading into this crisis. Would this be a repeat of 2011, where both sides got very close to this? They did get a deal at the very last minute, but still, one of the credit agencies did downgrade the U.S. back when we were in this similar standoff, even after they had reached it. So there was an open question about whether that could happen again this time around. Now, some of the credit agencies say that that is not what's going to happen, that they feel like now that the deal is here and the president's going to sign it tomorrow officially, that we can start to put this behind us. But that one you mentioned, Fitch, is going to keep the rating on what it's known as negative watch through the third quarter of this year. They say because of the dysfunction in Washington over more than the last decade or so. So that's still something that it means the U.S. economy isn't totally out of the woods, Gadi, but it's a larger reflection of what we've seen that got us to this point. And the White House says they're not that concerned that this is ultimately going to happen, because they do feel the compromise means that the U.S. is on far better footing economically.
Now, a lot of people also talking about the student loan payments that are expected to restart at the end of August, and student loan forgiveness is tied up in the Supreme Court. How's the White House preparing to tackle that?
Yeah, this was one element to this budget and debt limit deal that isn't getting talked about as much because there's so much else in it, but it's a really important one because it means now that essentially it is law. This isn't something now that the Biden administration has as much leeway with. Remember, during the pandemic, those student loan payments were continued to be extended and basically punted down the line more than 8 times. But now the president has said that he's not going to do that again, meaning those payments will resume later this year. But that's all happening on track right now with what the Supreme Court is weighing, and we expect there could be a decision in that during this month, and that could really determine whether somebody is going to be eligible, a single individual, for up to $10,000 in debt forgiveness, or somebody who was on Pell Grants up to $20,000. So there are still some questions for other borrowers who have been in limbo throughout the entirety of this process, but it does seem that those payments will have to resume, at least for many people involved, at the end, toward the end of this year. Gadi.
And Monica, real quick before we go, I got to ask about that fall on stage yesterday that the president took. There has been a lot of talk about his age. How is the White House responding to all that?
Look, they were very quick to point out that it was the president himself who said he felt fine, that he was totally okay. He actually waved off the on-duty doctor in the moment who said, do you want me to check you out, give you a once-over? And then again, on the plane on Air Force One flying home from that commencement address, his personal physician offered, again, do you need anything? Do you want me to check anything out? And he told him again, I feel completely fine. So the White House here assuring everybody the president is doing okay, that he just tripped over that sandbag that was holding up his teleprompter after shaking hands with more than 900 cadets there in Colorado yesterday, Gadi.
Monica Alba, thanks so much. And here's something you wouldn't know if you were here in L.A. for the last week. It's been very gloomy here, but around the country, it has been a hot one. Check this out. These are the temperatures across the country right now. A lot of cities saw highs of almost 90 degrees today, and summer is just getting started. Now, schools in Michigan were closed for the second day in a row because of the heat, and about 100 schools in Philly let kids out early. And take a look at these funnel clouds. This was the scary sight for a lot of people in Texas today as they saw a ton of rain and tornado threats. But that's not all. The first tropical storm of the season is forming in the Gulf, and NBC's Bill Cairns has more on all of this for us tonight.
Gadi, what a weather pattern we're in. I mean, we have a tropical storm. We've had flash flooding, tornadoes, and this incredible heat wave in areas of the Northeast. And look how hot some of these regions were today. Baltimore was 97, flirting with upper 90s today. Allentown, these are all record highs or tied record highs, by the way. From Poughkeepsie, even northern Vermont was in the 90s today. It wasn't that humid, and it hasn't rained a lot, so it was really easy for the ground to heat up quickly. So some areas get relief tomorrow, but not all. We will see some cooler conditions from Boston, the coastal locations, New York City, New Jersey, Baltimore, D.C. But the Ohio Valley and the Great Lakes remains very hot. 95 in St. Louis, 90 in Chicago O'Hare, and even 90s as far north as Fargo, heading up into areas of Minnesota, too. And then as we head towards Sunday and Monday, still very warm in the middle of the country, a little bit cooler in the Great Lakes, but it looks like the heat is here to stay, especially for our friends in the Midwest who would like some water, too. And the outlook for the rest of June, warmer than average temperatures, the northern plains, all through the Great Lakes. So that's not a good sign because the drought's starting to really set in. We need moisture in this area, and it doesn't look too hopeful either. The June outlook is drier than average throughout this region, and in some spots there'll be no rain at all. The other portion, the good news part of this is we're still getting wet weather through the Rockies and some portions of the West, which is very unusual, especially in the mountains of California this time of year, so we'll take that. As far as the tornadoes go, haven't heard of any destruction, haven't heard of anything bad, but we have had at least 6 reports of tornadoes right along the New Mexico border was a couple, and a few near Fort Stockton, also 1 or 2 in areas of Nebraska. But so far, so good. This threat will continue through this evening, and then after the sun sets, it will diminish as far as the tornado threat. But look at all these thunderstorms around Lubbock to Amarillo. That's a lot of heavy rain, and the concern with that is flash flooding. You probably saw the amazing pictures from yesterday, and we're still under a flash flood warning in the Amarillo area. So a rough night, and this weekend things will quiet down a little bit, especially in areas of the Northeast, and we don't have to worry about that tropical storm either, Gadi. That's going to dissipate over the weekend.
Bill, thanks so much. At least 200 people are dead and hundreds others hurt after several trains crashed in eastern India. Now, state officials say emergency rescue efforts are still underway right now. They think about 200 people are still trapped in overturned train cars, and NBC's Matt Bradley has more.
Tonight in India, fears passengers are still trapped after a massive and deadly train crash. People urgently searching through twisted metal for survivors who described complete chaos when the crash happened. Everything went topsy-turvy. People started falling on each other, said this passenger. My mind stopped working. The whole coach was tilted. The death toll expected to rise. Hospitals tonight overwhelmed. Some passengers describing horrifying scenes. When I came out of the train, I saw someone had lost their hand. Someone had lost their leg, said this passenger. Emergency workers now in a round-the-clock rescue operation.
We are naturally concerned about looking after the bodies and removing all the living to the hospitals.
It's unclear exactly what happened. The collision may have involved 2 or 3 trains. Railway accidents are tragically common in India, occurring several hundred times per year.
Matt Bradley reporting. Thanks so much, Matt. And former star of Wild 'N Out, Jacky Oh, has died at just 32 years old. The popular comedy sketch series confirmed her death in a social media post Thursday, calling her a talented Wild 'N Out family member whose impact will be forever treasured and missed. Miss Jacky Oh spent 5 seasons on that show, which launched back in 2005 with host Nick Cannon. NBC's Dana Griffin joins us now with more on this. Dana, while there's no cause of death that's been released yet, I mean, she was a YouTube star. She was a star of this show. There are tens of thousands of people online that are talking a lot about this, and a lot of them are saying that it has to do possibly with something called a mommy makeover. Is there any truth to that?
Well, here's the thing. Investigators are not confirming her cause of death, but the reason there's a lot of online speculation is because, according to TMZ and the LA Times, there's been a since deleted post where Jacky Oh talked about, being in Miami for this, quote, mommy makeover. And it's raising a lot of speculation because, Wednesday night, according to the police report, officers responded to a nearby Miami hotel to find a woman unresponsive. They transported her to the hospital, but despite resuscitation, they could not save her life. So a mommy makeover usually entails anything from liposuction to a breast augmentation to a Brazilian butt lift, which is really popular right now. So a lot of people are kind of wondering, did this have anything to do with her death? Again, we have not been able to confirm that. So, we reached out to the doctor's office that a lot of people have been posting about. We're not going to name the doctor because obviously, they have not said this person is responsible or even if, she had this procedure, but we have not heard back from the alleged doctor's office that may have possibly performed the surgery to find out if there's any truth to all of this.
I know a little bit earlier we heard from BET Media Group. They are the ones that aired Wild 'N Out. They said a spokesperson called her a loving friend and beloved colleague of the Wild 'N Out cast. What else are we hearing from her fans and from her family right now?
Yeah, well, according to People.com, they actually heard from the Smith family and DC Young Fly, who is her longtime partner. She also shares 3 kids with him. And they said, we thank everyone for their well wishes and ask for privacy during this very difficult time. And a lot of stars, fans, and friends are posting about this. You've got NFL star Odell Beckham Jr. He posted a screenshot from the Smith family that read in part, our family is still processing this very tragic and unexpected loss. We ask that you please give us privacy during this time. So obviously a lot for this family to sort out, but there's, people who are other stars who knew her very well, calling her very sweet, kind. Even her agent or her manager said that Jacky wasn't just beautiful. She was intelligent, hardworking, a loving mother, and that this is just really tragic. We know that besides being a YouTube star, she also had her own makeup line and she dealt with real estate, but her pride and joy was really her family.
Her family, those 3 kids. Dana, thanks so much for joining us.
No problem.
And turning now to that apartment building collapse that we've been covering this week in Davenport, Iowa, NBC News has obtained a 911 call made just 24 hours before that apartment building started to come down. Take a listen.
One of my guys was working. He was cleaning up in the back parking lot and said that the wall is bulging out. It's been under repair. Someone is there working on it and told him to get out of the way because it's not looking good. I don't know if the fire might want to stop by and look at it.
Again, that was before that collapse. Meanwhile, the search for survivors is now officially over. 3 men remain unaccounted for, and they are now presumed to be dead. As the search and rescue efforts are starting to evolve into a recovery mission, local officials are getting some help. Both the state task force and the Red Cross are now on hand to assist. And joining us now from Davenport is NBC's Shaq Brewster. So, Shaq, officials are now going into this next phase of the mission. They're calling this a controlled recovery, right? What does that mean?
Right. Well, it looks like very similar to what we saw right after the building came down. I'll let you take a look at what we're seeing now and what we've been seeing not just through the day, but even last night. And you see that big equipment. You're seeing big excavation equipment going in. You see the claw. It sometimes goes in, picks up debris. You see rescue workers, I believe you see in the white hard hats there, going through, sifting through debris, being very careful. You know, one thing that we heard from the mayor earlier today and really throughout the week is that this is is going to be a delicate process. He called this a place of rest, and that's because there are still 3 individuals who officials say are still trapped behind in that rubble. So they're going through, it's an active scene. We see sometimes dogs on scene, and they're going through piece by piece to try to recover those individuals who've been left behind, Gadi.
And I keep thinking about the people that you've heard from that said that this was potentially going to fall before it fell. And when you see them with heavy machinery in there starting to take out pieces, you got to wonder, I mean, what are the chances of this whole thing coming down while people are trying to recover the remains inside?
That is always a concern. It's been a concern throughout this process. One thing that we've seen in the past day or so is, you might actually see it right there. We don't even need to move, but those wood panels right there, those are new. That is part of the efforts to shore up this building. And, you know, you mentioned officials have from the beginning said that they believed that this building could come down at any moment. And part of the hesitation to send folks in is because of the instability of that building. I want you to hear the fire chief explain that simple question that so many people had, so many residents here had, so many members of the media had. What took so long to get to this point?
And the question was, why did the city wait?
The first 24 to 36 hours that we were there, the building was in a constant state of motion, and we had to allow the building to settle a little bit before we could actually formalize on a solid plan.
So their answer is that the conditions of the building are essentially safer at this point, especially with some of the reinforcements that they put in, and that's what's allowing rescue teams and rescue workers to get so close to the building. One thing we also heard and learned from the officials earlier today is the idea that it's not just them out here. They're consulting with folks from around the country. That's been something you've heard from residents. They wanted outside support, outside help. Well, officials are saying that they've been consulting with Miami-Dade Fire Department to see how the best way to, what the best way is to go and conduct this search and recovery mission, Gadi.
Such a sketchy situation out there and such dangerous work happening behind those barriers. Shaq Brewster, thanks so much.
Absolutely. Got it.
And we've got much more ahead this hour, including the latest jobs report. It beat expectations, but the unemployment rate also jumped a little bit. We're going to break down what that really means for the economy. Plus, the most famous horse track in the world suspends all races. What leaders at Churchill Downs hopes this is going to accomplish following a dozen deaths there. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome back. Let's check in on some of the headlines we're watching tonight. New documents are revealing more about Jeffrey Epstein's final days in prison before he was found dead by suicide back in 2019. Now, among the more notable revelations include his attempt to connect by mail with Larry Nassar, that former U.S. gymnastics team doctor that was found guilty of sexually abusing multiple athletes. In San Jose, California, police have arrested 31-year-old Kevin Parkerana as a suspect in a violent crime spree that left 3 people dead and 3 others hurt. Now, police allege he attempted 2 carjackings, stabbed 2 people, and then committed a fatal hit and run. And for those of you looking forward to Starliner spacecraft's first crewed flight to the International Space Station, we've got some pretty bad news to share. Officials from NASA and Boeing announced that the launch, originally scheduled for July 21st, has been delayed. Now, they had to make that call after engineers discovered problems with the Boeing's parachutes, as well as the tape that covers internal wiring. And Churchill Downs, the horse race track famously home to the Kentucky Derby, is suspending the rest of its season. And the reason, a dozen horses died there in the past month alone, and its parent company is now going to check on its safety measures. And the Scripps National Spelling Bee has a new winner. It is Dev Shaw, a 14-year-old from Largo, Florida, and he took home the top prize with the word Samophile. Now, let alone spelling it, I've got to be honest, had to look that word up. Apparently, it means an organism that prefers or thrives in sandy areas. Dev took home more than $50,000 in cash and prizes. Congratulations, Dev. And the DOJ investigation into those classified documents found at former Vice President Mike Pence's home has now closed. And the case is closing with no charges against Pence, which is kind of coming at a great time for him because the former VP is setting the stage to announce his 2024 presidential bid next week. Now, this is all in relation to those small number of classified documents that were found at Pence's Indiana home earlier this year. NBC's Ken Delanian has more.
That's right, Gadi. The Pence team announced today that the Department of Justice sent them a letter yesterday informing them that they had closed the investigation into how those classified documents got to Mike Pence's house without criminal charges. And we also learned that the DOJ had interviewed former Vice President Pence as part of their investigation. We don't know any of the other details about what they found, about how those documents got there. Recall that Pence announced in January that some classified documents had been found at his residence in Indiana. The DOJ announced an investigation. It's not really a surprise. There was no evidence of any criminality. And in fact, we now know from this whole saga that there's lots of instances of classified information finding their way to the wrong place. This is, though, a fortuitous decision and outcome, not only for Mike Pence, who's announcing his presidential campaign this week, we believe, but also for the Justice Department, which had no interest. Nobody around here has any interest in naming another special counsel to be involved in another high-profile investigation of a politician during election season. So everyone is glad to have that investigation behind them, and that now leaves two other pending investigations into classified material at the homes and offices of top senior officials. Obviously, there's a special counsel investigating how classified material found its way into President Biden's home and office. There's no evidence that that case has been closed, nor is there any indication that President Biden has yet been interviewed by that special counsel, which we would expect to happen. So that case has some string to play out. And then, of course, this entirely separate and much more significant documents case involving former President Trump, which we believe is working its way towards a conclusion this summer. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence that is pointing to potential obstruction of justice by then President Trump. And we also now have this tape in which we're told Trump admitted to having classified information, knowingly had it, and the DOJ believes that he withheld it. So really important development for Mike Pence that this investigation has been closed, but still a lot of other investigating to do on other fronts involving classified documents. Gadi?
And some good news heading into the weekend. The May jobs report is out, and it looks like the U.S. economy is cranking out new jobs left and right. Last month, about 339,000 jobs were added. That's almost 150,000 more than we thought we were going to get. Unemployment is slightly on the rise, and with us now to break all this down is NBC's Brian Chung. Brian, first off, where are the bulk of these new jobs coming from?
Yeah, well, interestingly, we saw it in sectors that we haven't historically seen those gains in previous months. So, for example, professional and business services actually adding quite a few, actually over 40,000 jobs in the month of May. So when you compare that to previous jobs, rather over 60,000 in the month. Now, when you take a look at previous jobs, it was mostly leisure and hospitality. So bars and restaurants that were driving a lot of those gains. And indeed, we did see job gains in that sector up over 40,000. But again, not as fast as we've seen in some of those more white-collar jobs. So there's a lot of interesting things happening in here. Also noticeably the fact that the unemployment rate did go up to 3.7% compared to 3.4% in the prior month. But broadly speaking, again, to see 339,000 jobs added into, by the way, a hiking cycle from the Federal Reserve, that's not something you usually tend to see, Gadi.
Is there an explanation for that point, like 3.4% jump that we saw in the unemployment rate?
Yeah, it is.
We're seeing more jobs added?
Yeah, it's very counterintuitive, right? Because we saw so many jobs gained, but then we saw the unemployment rate rise. And the reason is because it's two different surveys. So when we talk about the unemployment rate, that comes from a survey where the government calls people's homes and says, hey, what's your employment status? Whereas the 339,000 figure actually comes from a separate survey where they call hiring firms or companies like, the shop down the street or the company at the mall, for example, and ask, well, how many people do you hire during the month? So there's a discrepancy that economists are trying to square. Maybe one explanation would be self-employed people, because that wouldn't be captured when you call the phone. They would say, well, I'm not working if they are no longer self-employed, whereas the establishment survey would say something different. Either way, there is a bit of a statistical anomaly there that economists are trying to figure out, Gadi.
Overall, is this good? Is the economy looking pretty healthy right now?
Yeah, it does. And again, when you take a look at what's happening in this economy, the Federal Reserve has been, since the beginning of last year, trying to deliberately slow this economy through higher interest rates. And a lot of economists would have told you that by now they would have expected the unemployment rate to be even higher than it is right now, even though 3.7% is a tick up from what we've seen in April. So when we take a look at the overall picture, you see inflation coming down. It was at a 9.1 annual pace. Now it's at 4.9%. Well, inflation's coming down. The labor market still appears to be chugging along. So that seems to be a good situation by all standards.
I'll keep our fingers crossed. Ryan, thanks so much. And coming up, protests over pride at an LA elementary school. The heated exchanges between parents all over a book about what makes a family. That's still ahead. But first, you got to see this. A school bus packed with students caught fire in Milwaukee. And what could have been a horrific tragedy became a heroic rescue. Just a few blocks away from the school, that bus driver, she smelled smoke. After trying to radio in an emergency, she kept her cool. She made sure more than 30 kids made it safely off that burning bus.
My mommy instincts kicked in really fast.
Yeah, and what you don't know from looking at that, but you might guess from looking at that, she's 8 months pregnant. And like a true hero, she was the last off the bus, double checking to make sure no one was left behind. She did suffer some smoke inhalation, but she says she is doing just fine. And we'll be right back. Hey, welcome back. Let's get you caught up in 30 seconds. President Biden addressed the nation from the Oval Office on the debt ceiling deal, saying it's not the deal everyone wanted, but it's the one everyone needed. He's expected to sign that bill into law tomorrow. And a train crash in India kills more than 200 people and leaves hundreds more hurt. Rescuers are still working to free 200 people trapped inside the derailed cars there. And NBC News has obtained a 911 call made from that partially collapsed building in Davenport, Iowa. And that was a warning that there was something wrong with the building. That call was made just days before that deadly collapse. Meanwhile, schools across the country have been rocked by fights over just what kind of curriculum kids should be learning. And at one school here in Los Angeles, that has led to a pride flag being burned, which police are investigating as a hate crime. And this morning, protests erupted at the school over what happened at an assembly. Nyala Charles has a story.
A pride event at a Los Angeles elementary school met with protest and police.
Get out of here. Get out of my face.
Tensions running high outside of Sataquai Elementary School Friday, where the school kicked off Pride Month with an optional assembly that included a video reading of the children's book, The Great Big Book of Families. The book features all types of families, including ones with two dads or moms.
Stop grooming our kids!
Parents against the assembly wearing shirts that say no sexualizing our kids and parental choice matters, urging parents to keep their kids at home.
This is a peaceful protest against LAUSD. LAUSD needs to stop grooming our kids.
The school district is standing by its decision with support from anti-protesters.
I think it's great, especially for my daughter, to see representation of our family. It's just all inclusive, which means she knows that Rainbow Day is all about love and accepting everyone, no matter skin color, where they come from.
There is no sex education specific to the book that's being read today. And it portrays a reality that is not only common, it is real to many of our kids.
California has the largest LGBTQ population in the nation, but even it isn't susceptible to the nationwide backlash against LGBTQ curriculum in schools. In Florida, at Governor Ron DeSantis' request, all public schools are banned from classroom instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity. In Illinois, a parent called police on a teacher for offering an LGBTQ book to her middle school class. And in Texas, books on race and sexuality are disappearing from schools in record numbers.
There are multiple hundreds of books that we need to audit out of our libraries right now.
Be a man!
What's happening at this California school, just a microcosm of what's being seen around the country.
And NBC's Nyala Charles joins us now. Nyala, it was so many people there that the cops actually had to divide the protesters and the counter-protesters up, and even still, they were clashing. You see that happening right in front of an elementary school. My question is, were there kids around? Were they able to see all those people fighting?
Well, the students weren't there at the protest, but they definitely saw them on their way in and out of school today. And Gadi, it's important to mention, too, most of the protesters there today don't even have kids at the school. So it just shows you how dividing this issue has become.
Well, Charles, thanks so much. And turning now to a shift happening in some parts of the country when it comes to child labor laws. States like Ohio and Missouri are starting to consider legislation that would loosen restrictions as a way to deal with worker shortages. And some of those proposals include things like letting kids work more hours on school nights or even letting teenagers as young as 14 serve alcohol. But that has some worried about what this could all mean. And NBC's Jesse Kirsch is following this closely for us tonight.
Gadi, there's a push right now by some, including state legislators, some state legislators in Ohio, to loosen child labor laws. Proposed legislation in Ohio is an effort by some state legislators in the Buckeye State to make it so that 14 and 15-year-olds can work later throughout the year. Right now, there are stipulations as to when you can work during the school year and during the summer months when you're, in theory, out of school. But even if this legislation were to pass at the state level, it's something that the Department of Labor confirmed to me largely wouldn't be relevant because federal law would still say that 14 and 15-year-olds would have to be done working by 7 p.m. during the school year. But this is something that is still being looked at the state level. One of the sponsors for the legislation in Ohio saying that this would make it so that 14 and 15-year-olds could be, quote, earning a good wage and learning valuable employment skills while providing local employers with consistent staff and helping small businesses keep their doors open. This is not surprisingly something that not everybody agrees on, probably not surprising to people watching this at home. Here's what one critic shared with us.
We don't think you can balance a labor shortage on the backs of teen workers. You know, they're just vulnerable. And a lot of the changes being contemplated would actually damage those kids educationally.
That critic having concerns about the Ohio legislation and efforts elsewhere as well, speaking to multiple concerns when we spoke about this. As for the Ohio legislation, it has cleared the state Senate. It is making its way through the state House right now. And if it passes there, it would make its way to the governor for possible signature. Gadi?
Jesse Kirsch, thank you so much. Up next, the new evacuation orders in Canada as more crews head out to contain raging wildfires there. Plus, the good, the bad, and the future. This week's headline from the world of AI, and we're going to find out if technology is wired to have a funny bone. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome back. Around the World begins in Canada tonight, where wildfires are raging in both the east and the west. Officials say today that there were 15 active wildfires, including 4 burning out of control in Nova Scotia. More than 16,000 people have been evacuated in the area surrounding Halifax. And people living along the coast and parts of Quebec are the latest evacuees. Nearly 10,000 people have now been asked to leave their homes there. The United States is calling for the UN Security Council to condemn North Korea for its attempted satellite launch this week, but 2 countries are not, Russia and China. Instead, both countries blamed Washington for rising tensions on the Korean peninsula. In Nepal, a Sherpa pulled off a rare high-altitude rescue on Mount Everest. Now, that guide carried the climber 1,900 feet down to a helicopter waiting to rescue him. Officials say the Malaysian man was found at Everest's death zone. That's a section of the mountain near the 29,000-foot summit where temperatures can drop about 22 degrees below zero. At least 12 people have died climbing Mount Everest this year alone. And finally, a massive sandstorm engulfed the Suez Canal in Egypt. New video shows large clouds of sand surrounding ships as they pass through the canal there. That sandstorm also hit Cairo as well, though with less intensity. And now to an inspiring story 8 decades in the making. U.S. Ambassador to Germany, Amy Gutmann, whose family were Holocaust survivors, made an emotional homecoming this week to the German town her father's family escaped from after Hitler's rise to power. NBC's chief foreign affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell has a story.
Nestled in the hills of Bavaria, the small German town of Feuchtwangen. For 800 years, home to a Jewish community who owned homes, ran businesses, built a synagogue.
How wonderful is it to be here in Germany, in the town where your father and grandparents, generations of Gutmanns lived.
It's amazing and emotional to be here where my father
and my grandparents and his siblings lived and had to flee are the first.
U.S. Ambassador to Germany, Amy Gutmann, the first American ambassador here whose family were Holocaust survivors, now invited by the current mayor to return for a ceremony of reconciliation and remembrance.
If we want to assume responsibility and ensure that we never see such injustice again in Feuchtwangen, it is imperative that we remember.
As a memorial, these cobblestones inscribed with the names of Gutmann's family were placed in front of the family's former home and store, now a bookstore. 100,000 of these Stolpersteine have been created for Holocaust victims in 30 European countries by the artist Gunter Demnig, whose father fought for Nazi Germany in the war. Jewish families have been living in this town since the 13th century. But after the anti-Jewish riots in 1937 and 38, they were all forced out, many to the death camps. Gutmann's immediate family got out in time, but two of her uncles were sent to Buchenwald. They survived, one disabled for life. You don't mince words when you talk about the trauma and the horrors of the past for the citizens of this town.
I have to be really honest about this. We're still seeing so many horrors of anti-Semitism in the world, and Feuchtwangen was one of the places where Nazism thrived.
In 1933, 70% of the people here voted for Adolf Hitler, and the Nazi mayor led the burning of the synagogue in 1938. Why is it so important for the people in this small town and in Germany to remember what the Nazis did and to remember the Holocaust?
If they didn't think back and remember, there's no way we could say never again. I also have to say personally, it just means so much to me and my family to be able to come back here and realize that the country my father fled is now working with us to combat anti-Semitism.
Where the synagogue once stood, there's now a museum with an exhibit on the town's Jewish life.
This is my grandpa.
Oh, really? Yes.
And the ambassador has come full circle, able to retrieve a part of her family history she had never known.
A remarkable story. Andrea Mitchell, thanks so much. And before we go, we've got your 60 seconds of joy. And this time, we get a lesson from some high school students on how to pull off a prank. But first, to the stars and back. The mission pilot of the latest Axiom flight takes us through his 9-day trip, and he's going to tell us what really blew his mind. So stay tuned. It's time now for the future of everything and This Week in AI. Of course, as usual, there's some good news, some bad news, and some existential news. Let's start with a positive note. The world of health and medicine is starting to see some of the most promising results from AI experiments so far. For example, researchers at MIT and McMaster University say they have found a new antibiotic using the help of AI. Now, the researchers discovered the drug from a library of thousands of drug compounds, but it was AI that found the one compound that can kill a type of drug-resistant bacteria. And just today, a top World Health Organization official described a lot of the ways AI is shaping global health.
AI is a tool, and as such is potentially a hugely powerful tool in the future of health. But like all tools, in the wrong hands and without proper regulation and without proper oversight, that tool can be turned to inadvertent bad use or to intentional bad use.
And that brings us to the not-so-good news. On Wednesday, a lot of top scientists warned about the risk of extinction from AI. Now, some of the experts who signed that letter were at the White House last month with the full attention of the president, who said this to Air Force Academy graduates yesterday.
We're seeing engaging technology, emerging technologies, all AI, from AI and 3D printing, that could change the character of conflict itself. Some are very worried that AI can actually overtake human thinking.
And with us now is Gary Marcus, host of the podcast Humans versus Machines. Gary, welcome. First off, back in March, you were one of the people who signed that letter calling for a pause to AI. Do you think that's possible at this point? And since then, has your opinion changed at all?
I didn't think it would be possible when I signed it, but I thought that it was important to sign it so that people would realize how urgent these issues are. And I think in that sense, it was successful. You know, I gave Senate testimony a couple weeks ago, and by the time I was there at the Senate, I think everybody in Washington realized how serious this was. And so I think the pause letter did a good job of bringing the seriousness of the issues, how many risks that we're facing and how little we really understand what's going on. I think the letter did a good job on that, even if the practical thing that it called for probably isn't going to happen.
In terms of practical application here, the first one that comes to mind is regulation, right? How do you see that regulation taking shape, and what do you think should be prioritized?
There's a lot of things that need to be done, but top priorities, I would say, is we need a national AI agency. We can't just hope that all the existing agencies will cover all of the new things. And we need somebody in the White House who's a cabinet level, you know, cabinet secretary who understands all of what's going on and has the expertise and the staff and so forth. So I think we need that. I think we need something like the FDA system where in order to deploy something at mass scale, you have to make a hazard analysis, a safety analysis, and say, this is why the benefits outweigh the cost. So it's one thing to, do research, but if you're going to roll something out to 100 million people, really somebody in the government, maybe independent scientists, should evaluate how safe is this really?
So you're talking about like a safety czar or like a secretary for, I don't know, emerging technology and AI?
I mean, there are different ways you can do it, but I would say like a cabinet level office around AI or emerging technologies. And then one of the functions within that should be something like an FDA process that might include peer review from scientists. There might be onboard staff. There are different ways to do it. I mean, you can think, you know, you have an agency like FDA that is making sure that drugs and medicine are safe. We need to do the same thing for AI.
In your latest podcast, you talked about, can AI make you laugh, right? So we asked good old Google Bard to write a joke about AI humor. It was not great. Here's what we got. Why did the AI comedian get fired? Because it kept telling dad jokes. I don't know where the punchline is, but this other one was, what do you call an AI that tells jokes? Yeah, not funny, right? I mean, well, I don't know. Might be funny to some people. This one is, what do you call an AI that tells jokes that are funny to other AIs? A chatbot? Like slightly better? I don't know. What do you think? Are we ever going to see AI be able to replicate something as nuanced as human humor?
Well, as Prince said, forever is a mighty long time. So, I mean, ever? Yeah, I mean, we might see much funnier machines. In the short term, they don't really understand people. You know, all they're really doing is putting together text, and they are kind of like autocomplete on steroids. That doesn't really tell them how the world works, doesn't really tell them what's funny. If you have them write jokes, you have them write 100, some of them will be funny, but it won't know which ones are the funny ones. So we talk about that in the podcast. We have Bob Mankoff, who used to be the cartoon editor, excuse me, at the New Yorker. And, you know, he's able to sometimes coax jokes out of it, but he has taste, and so he can tell which ones are which.
And it also needs to be able to respond to like snorts and cringes and all those things, because those jokes.
Yeah, and to understand what cringe humor is, like when it, you know, when it bends and it's funny, and when you're so past the taboo that it's not funny anymore. It just doesn't have that sense.
I know a lot of writers in LA here are going to be watching this and saying, all right, our jobs are safe for a little bit longer. Gary, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot for having me.
And the competition to commercialize space tourism is heating up. Now, we know about Virgin Galactic and its goals to launch paying customers later this month. Well, SpaceX is already doing it. The company's second Axiom mission saw their astronauts spend 9 days on board the ISS. Take a look.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Together we expand what is possible in low Earth orbit. Ad Astra and Godspeed AX2.
Could you imagine sitting in that rocket? Well, we met AX2 mission pilot John Schaffner before the launch, and before he had ever been to space, turns out he did not want to come home.
Well, this is my first trip, actually, to space, and I'm not sure I want to leave. So I've been looking around for a place to hide so that when they leave, they can't find me and they'll have to come back and get me later. But I think they'll probably find me.
Well, they did drag him out of the ISS. He did make it back. John Schaffner is with us now, along with his wife, Janine. Well, first off, we have both of you here. I understand you guys have quite the love story. You literally met while fighting Earth's gravity. Is that right?
Yeah, well, we sure did. We met skydiving in Florida. You know, Janine had been a skydiver for some time, and I went down to get reacquainted after a long spell of being away from it, and we met the first day. It was magical.
And Janine, when you saw what he just said up there in space, did you FaceTime? I don't know how FaceTime works, but did you call him and say, no, you're coming back home?
Well, he could stay as long as he wants. He's always done whatever he wants, and it's fine by me. I think that he's really at home when he's in space. I think he's going to go back. Maybe he takes me with him next time.
There you go. Yeah, a round trip ticket for two, or maybe just a one-way, if you guys can stay up there long enough. John, 9 days is a pretty long time. I mean, how do you feel physically, and what was the training like beforehand?
Well, beforehand, there's a lot of systems and emergency procedures, for the ISS with NASA, and then with SpaceX, it was, the piloting the systems for the Dragon capsule. So we were well prepared with our entire crew. Coming back was interesting because you have to readapt. The adaptation going in and the adaptation coming out is, well, that's a bit of a nuisance, but it's part of spaceflight.
What do you mean by nuisance? Does it feel like you're like sick, or is it just fatigue, or what are the manifestations?
Well, everybody responds differently, I understand. I did not get nauseous in any way, but I just had a sense of some vertigo. It takes a day and a half for that to go away. Coming back to Earth, you're not coordinated. Your muscle control, walking, your gyros aren't in order yet, so those take 2 or 3 days. So, I'll take that anytime for a space flight, though, Gadi.
Yeah, small price to pay. You did ask students around the world, what would it look like if we lived in space? Over 900 responses from all over the world. Now you have quite a bit of expertise in this field, too. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. We envisioned this wonderful art contest, art and poetry, inspired by a painting I did when I was 10 of Ed White's first spacewalk. So we wanted to see what other children today were thinking about in space. So, the action of how to live in space. What would it be like if we lived in space? And we got a fascinating, an amazing response, as you said, over 930 entries from 26 countries, people showing us their art, their poetry. It was absolutely stunning, and we intend to exhibit that and show more people, what children today are thinking about space. They already have these ideas in their heads, and we want educators to be aware of that and help focus young people on their internal messaging that they desire to know more about space.
And speaking of poetry, I mean, feel free to wax poetically here, but how would you sum up I guess, leaving Earth's orbit, or at least Earth's atmosphere?
Well, it was magical. I had dreamed of space flight literally my entire life. So having a chance to do that, I had a lot of anticipation, but it was far exceeded. The moment of liftoff was just took me away. Going on to the ISS, the first glimpse of the ISS as we approached, looking out of the cupola at the Earth below, the rim of the Earth, dropping into this, I described it as this cool pool of space water in the cupola where the sounds change and you're surrounded by this Earth space image all at once. It's just magical. So having a chance to experience that and to take that feeling forward, I intend to share that. That's my mission going forward, is to help young people today understand what's going on out there and how they can be involved. As you can see, we had a great time showing and getting young people excited.
Oh, I mean, I couldn't imagine painting a picture and then the next thing you know, you see it floating up there in space. What a treat. Janine, okay, so let's talk plans. Like, what happens next? Do you have the bug? Is there a possibility that you go up next?
I don't know. We've done so much between skydiving, base jumping, motor racing for the last 10 years. And I really felt this was John's own thing. But I did get a tour of SpaceX at Hawthorne and then meeting the incredible people at Axiom. And I have to say, when I saw those 9 Falcon engines like strapped together, I got a little bit jealous. And then when I saw the launch, I got a little bit more jealous. And I have to say, I've got more of the bug now for sure.
Oh, we can't wait to see. You know, in skydiving, it's always going down, but what goes down must go up too, hopefully. Janine and John, thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And it's not a Friday without a little fun, so here are your 60 seconds of joy. These high school seniors in Delaware just executed the ultimate prank. They snuck into their principal's house in the middle of the night. We are talking 1 a.m. They had a sleepover. Check out the big reveal when Principal McGrath woke up in the morning.
Good morning, little bunnies. How many? Oh my God. And all of you
might want to walk around.
Oh, you two are really, you are in the most trouble. How did I not hear you? You're like commandos. This is the most beautiful sight I could have imagined.
The most beautiful thing, huh? Principal McGrath said that senior class was crammed into her house like sardines. What a great sport. That does it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you on Monday, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.